everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome to the Whole You Habit Guide. I'm really excited for this conversation with my co-founder, partner, best friend, Matt Frazier, also New York Times bestselling author. And what I would say, you're kind of like a habit change expert, right? At this point, I mean, you've thought about this stuff, written about this stuff, talked about this stuff for more than a decade. So I'm going to call you a habit change expert. And we are excited to have this conversation, a very informal one, as we kick off the new year, as everyone is thinking about bettering themselves, developing new habits. And we hope some of these tips and tricks and frameworks that we're going to talk about today help you to make this year the absolute best. So welcome, and thanks for the conversation, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for the lovely intro. When it comes to being a habit change expert, I would say I may be expert at writing about it and talking about it. I'm still very much a student when it comes to doing it, which I think we all are, because I fail at just as many habits as I try to start. But certainly I'm better than I used to be, and I think that has a lot to do with just a basic understanding of the not just the tools, which we'll get into at the end of this, but also a kind of basic framework for habit change. And so I think that's where we'll start, because it's such a common mistake for people. Is the tendency is people, specifically at a time like New Year's, they get to the end of the year, they get to this moment when the calendar changes, and suddenly, for some reason in people's heads, we believe that a switch has now flipped and we are forever different. So that means that we can just begin eating 100% plant-based diet if we've never done that before, or we can start running 30 minutes a day, or we can start going to the gym 3 times a week for an hour. And just, it's like, because there's a new calendar year, we can just do these things. That works usually for a couple weeks, all the while draining your willpower, because you don't realize how difficult these things are. You feel like you're toughing it out and you're making it and you're being successful, you're being perfect. And then eventually, your friends call and you haven't gone to the gym yet today, and they want to go to a happy hour and get margaritas and chips and salsa. And it's like, you got to choose, and you're 2 weeks in and your willpower is drained because of what you've done. And what happens is often you choose the chips and salsa, the margaritas. And then unfortunately for so many people, like, that's the end. Like that's where their perfect streak ends, and they don't even go back and try to do it again. So I'm not here to discourage people from trying the all at once, go for it change. I think that's fun and motivating and exciting, and I certainly like that around New Year's. But what I would advise is, if that doesn't work, or once that doesn't work, then I want you to resort to these smaller steps approach, which is really the framework that I like to think of. So as briefly as possible here, because I don't want to get too deep into this, the habit forms basically when you repeat that action many times. I mean, it's almost like there's a cable in your brain, and every time you do the action, a thread gets added to that cable. So it's getting thicker and thicker, and eventually it becomes this thing that you just do, because it's just your automatic habit. It's how you do things. When you're trying to form a new habit, there's a race between whether you're going to build that cable and whether you're going to have a strong habit first, or whether the willpower is going to run out first, and you're going to have that margarita and chips and salsa moment that basically breaks that habit strain there, because you give up on this perfectionist sort of ideal of yourself. And so the solution here actually is kind of a twofold solution. First of all, I would highly encourage you to do just one habit at a time. The problem with taking on a bunch of habits, like I'm going to go vegan and start running and start meditating, is that all those drain on the same willpower supply. So if we're talking about a race, and any one of those habits has to win this race against willpower and let you do it enough times before the willpower drains. If you've got 3 different habits, like drinking a Starbucks coffee during a Zoom call, for example, then and cutting that Starbucks out, then it's a problem, because the willpower now has a huge advantage over any one of those habits, right? It's going to drain fast because you're draining it every time you do any of these habits, and you're only building each one each time you do it. So I'd highly encourage just one habit at a time. If that's you just can't handle that, at least just go write the other habits down. For me, that's if I can write down the list of the habits I'm going to do, once I've established this one, that often can sort of calm the urge to try to do too much at once. So one habit at a time until it's comfortable. And second, probably just as importantly, take the smallest steps you possibly can. So my favorite example here is with running. If you wanted to run a marathon or something like that, you don't just start your marathon training program today. You don't even just start your mileage build-up program today. The very first thing you should do if you're not running is go for a 2-minute run or a 5-minute run, something that is completely not at all scary, not something you're going to procrastinate on, and just do it and try to do it every single day. That little tiny, and if that's too much, and if you can't even do that, then just get your shoes on and get out the door and call that success, for shutting the door behind you. To me, that's how you begin to build a habit. And so like the important thing is for this first month or so, when you're just building this habit, you don't see any physical changes. You don't get the benefits of that habit. But what's happening is it's invisible. It's happening in your head. That habit loop is forming, that loop that starts with like the trigger, the way that the thing that causes you to do your habit. And ideally you can have a similar one every day. Like maybe it's during your lunch break is when you do your run, for example. And then you do your action and you've got some sort of reward. It can be like an extrinsic reward where you're actually rewarding yourself. And Matt, I think you're going to touch on this in a minute, or it can be an intrinsic reward. But the smallest steps possible. Don't try to start going to the gym for an hour a day. Don't try to run 30 minutes a day. It's just too much to handle at the beginning if you haven't been doing those activities, not just physically on your body, but mostly mentally, and how much you'll procrastinate and push off. So I'd say do it for a week at 5 minutes or something. And then if you're successful, if you don't procrastinate any of those days, then let yourself go 10 minutes. And then the next week, go 15, and have that patience. Be okay with the fact that it's going to take a while to build this habit, because that's how you prevent the willpower from draining. You keep it easy. So it's really no big deal to go do your thing. And maybe it's even enjoyable. And to me, that's really the most successful, most reliable way to build a habit compared to the set a huge goal and then just go for it approach, which I have a feeling, Matt, you like the go for it approach.
I smiled throughout that because I have made every one of those mistakes and still make most of those mistakes, especially around this time of year when I'm like, making my list of new habits for the new year. And I'm like, here's my idealized self and the 15 different things that I'm going to change about myself. And I'm just like going to get it. But as I've gotten older, I'm a little bit more patient, and I have a little bit more compassion for myself, and now kind of target specific areas. Think about life a little differently than I have in the past, where I was like going to read a whole book every day, going to go to the gym for an hour every day, going to call my old friends every single day, right? And it just doesn't work, like you say, and that's why. I just saw a statistic because it's the time of year where everyone's talking about these statistics that 92% of people who set a goal end up not achieving that goal, which is a pretty dismal number, right? Like less than 1
it makes
out of
it sound
10.
like everyone's like just these lazy slobs who can't achieve a goal, or that setting New Year's goals is such a horrible idea. And I think it's really not. It's just that we don't tend to go about it in any sort of strategic fashion. And like you said, like a lot of it only comes from getting older and like making the mistake. And even once I learned this stuff, like you, I still do it. I still have the tendency to want to pile on all these changes. But as you said, like you said, you get older and you've made the mistake enough times that it starts to kind of sink in. So that's my hope. I don't expect anyone to suddenly like just learn how to change habits, but you'll make these mistakes this year perhaps, and then you'll actually realize now that you're making. You might say, okay, now I can go back and try it this other way.
So I think your framework is tried and true, and one that actually aligns much more closely to how I develop new habits. And I'm constantly developing new habits. In fact, right this second, I have, I don't think I've told you about this, but it's this nifty little gizmo. It's called Upright. And I have tried so many different things for my posture: standing desks, ball desks or ball chairs, pogo sticks, you name it. And I have always, just by virtue of my work, whether it's on a airplane or at a computer screen, just a lot of sitting and that natural inclination to collapse inwards on yourself with your shoulders coming together, whether it's holding a baby or looking at your phone or, on a computer. And so you're just not opening up your chest and having a good posture. At least I don't naturally. And I have found this actually to really help. It gives you a little buzz when your posture starts going the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so I'm constantly doing little things like that. I love self-experimentation. And I think the framework what
was the name of the advice really quick? Just because I think people want to check it out. I do too.
Upright.
Okay. And where did you pull it out of your ear? Like where was it when you?
So it comes with. By the way, I have no affiliation. This podcast is not sponsored by Upright or anything like that. I didn't actually plan on bringing it up, but there are technology, hacks that can sometimes help. I have found, generally speaking, that they don't so much. But certainly there's some apps like what's that one? Zero, for reducing alcohol intake. There's one for fasting that's called goes to show you I don't use these things, but it does help because one of the things that I will mention is, well, we'll get to that. But anyway, Upright. And there's a thing that you can like turn into like a reverse necklace. If you don't want to use the adhesive, which I thought I wasn't going to use the adhesive, but the adhesive lasts pretty decent amount of time, like, 3-5 days. And yeah, I don't know. I've only been using it for a few weeks, but certainly when I'm at a computer for long periods of time, like it is bringing that mindfulness that is almost impossible to do on your own when you're deep into a spreadsheet or into emails or whatever, and it's late in the afternoon and all of a sudden I find myself like, hunched over like a caveman, and it gives a little vibration and you pop back up. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think awareness and forgetting is a huge factor of like one of the reasons people forget their habits or don't do their habits is because they just forget them. Like it's really easy to get to the end of the day when you're new at something and say, oh man, I didn't do my 2-minute meditation today. So like, unless you've got it on a schedule or something, some sort of reminder is like a Post-it note or whatever, really can save a habit. And so like that's where technology really can help, if they can send you notifications or whatever, if you're not doing whatever it is.
Yeah, probably a good opportunity to remind folks that we have a new app, and probably came along in the email along with this video, but we're very much into all those different things and tracking. And that's the other thing too, is that sometimes those visual, well, there's obviously the triggers, the cues, the reminders, but there's also the power of seeing that habit visually. And that's the number one trick or tip that I offer anyone who's developing a new habit. So let's transition the conversation away from our plug of the posture tool to number one thing. I'm Jerry Seinfeld said he got good at writing jokes because he wrote jokes every single day, and he drew an X on a physical paper calendar. And for probably more than 6 years now, I buy a paper calendar at the start of the year. I have like whatever my habits are, and I draw an X. I don't use the paper calendar for anything else. My schedule changes way too frequently, but I have it, kind of next to all of my things on the desk, and just seeing those X's and knowing that I've made progress has such a reinforcement to continue, because you don't want to break that change. So for me, that's a positive reinforcement, but also it's that physical reminder, like you said, whether it's a Post-it on your mirror that you see in the morning because you're trying to floss every day. I also am a big believer of having giant water bottles. This is compliment hydrate, by the way. But like having a giant water bottle or a jug on my desk, like reminds me to drink more water. So I think whether it's a physical cue, a technology trigger, having something in your physical space, like I think that's probably the number one hack that I could suggest to everyone. Because like you say, it's so easy just to go on with your life and totally forget to do something on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, so like all those examples you just gave are pretty much changes to your environment in some form or another, rather than summoning up willpower. And that's what's the great thing. Like once you make that environmental change, it's not something that takes a lot more energy or effort from you once you've made it. Who knows what, like with the calendar, once you've taken the effort to go get that thing and put it next to your desk, then you've got it there, and it doesn't take much to check it off. And also to put that into context of the earlier discussion about the framework. Remember, I was talking about this race between willpower and the habit, and that in the habit, in the early formation phase of that, you're not really seeing the benefits in most cases of the habit yet, because it takes time before it starts really delivering those benefits. Like if you start going to the gym, you don't really get stronger or more in shape until a few months into it. But it's crucial that you're doing it in those early days still, because that's how the habit gets started. And so it takes patience, and that patience is really hard when it's invisible, when you can't see the habit change happening. But if you've got a bunch of big red X's right in front of you and you see this streak growing, like that feels really good. And it's a visual analog basically to what's going on in your head. You're seeing the strands get added basically. The challenge I think some people do run into with the Jerry Seinfeld technique, which I love, by the way, and I really want to get a calendar this year and try that, is this, it does sort of breed a perfectionism feeling, where there's this idea that like, I have this perfect streak, and if it gets messed up, then sometimes a lot of that willpower just goes right then. It's like, I blew my streak, and now why, like, what reason do I even have to get back on it? Especially if like you're, 19 days in and it's like, God, now I have to start over at zero. So I don't know who came up with this, but there's this thing called the 2-day rule, or the don't miss twice rule. And it basically just builds in a little bit of a fail safe kind of for that perfectionism problem. And it's basically that no matter what happens, you never let that chain break twice in a row. You never miss your thing on 2 days in a row, never miss 2 workouts in a row, never eat 2 bad meals in a row, whatever it is. Because so many people do that one mistake, and then that just leads immediately to the next one because they give up in some way. Because again, this illusion of perfection is sort of shattered. So the 2-day rule is really nice for giving way to fix that. Of course, then you can kind of run into the exact same problem with the 2-day thing. You say, I never have a perfect streak because there's never more than one miss. And then what happens when you do miss twice? But at least that's a little further out in the future from the first mistake you'll make.
Yeah, I think that's a great, just having those rules. I think a rule-based system, an agreement with yourself, so because you will fail, right? We all do. We all have those days. I had worn this posture thing for a while. It definitely fixed a little bit of a shoulder issue that I had. And then last week I had like a stomach bug. And obviously I was like, half in bed for 2 days, and like I didn't wear it. And so like my stats on the app are like, I missed that, right? But that's going to happen because you get a stomach bug on occasion. And actually, to address your point about the physical calendars, it's almost as if you get like a streak of streaks, is how I have reframed it in my mind. And it's helpful because you don't, the goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to be 1% better every single day, or at least that's my personal philosophy, right? And so I can go back and see last January, there was a lot of travel, there was a lot of illness or whatever, right? And so that didn't look so great in terms of the number of X's in that month. But as I flip through the pages, because I've got at least consistency over a number of months, like you start to see like, wow, there's a macro trend here, and I am changing, and it's that reinforcement,
right? Like
you said. But to your broader framework point about small steps and small commitments, the next tip I'll offer is reframing things into those smallest component parts, if you will, where you just say like, I may not. Let's say you want to reduce your alcohol intake, You don't say I'm going 100% sober every single day. You say I'm going to get 1% better, And if that means like just slightly less wine every night, or instead of 7 nights a week, you're going to go to 6, just those small steps, and reframing it can become so much less intimidating. That really allows you to kind of take flight into this new identity, right? And get some momentum, right? But not say, I'm going to start that chain on my calendar. And like, if I don't drink, I start the chain. Guess what? You're going to last about 7 days. And on the 8th, your boss is going to give you this huge project. You're going to be super stressed out. You're going to break the chain. And again, that's where all these different things, I think, start to build on themselves, because having, where we started this portion, some sort of rule-based system, some sort of agreement with yourself that says it's cool, totally cool to miss a day, right? Don't try and miss 2 days. And if I miss 2 days, that's cool too. It's about self-compassion, getting back on the bus, and remembering that you're making these 1% little tiny changes that will compound and make yourself better over time.
Yep, love that. The giving up alcohol is definitely a perennial favorite of mine.
Me too.
One of the techniques I've actually had more success with is, and And I have had some success with saying like, hey, I'm only going to drink on weekends or something. And like other than that, it's going to be the NA beer. And by the way, there's a lot of good NA beer out there now, like surprisingly, shockingly good. There are breweries that only make that kind of beer, which of course doesn't have any alcohol, or at least under 0.5% or something. And so for me, like, I think actually what's usually has worked better is like an agreement that says I'm actually going to have the amount of alcohol. So instead of like a 7% alcohol beer that I like much more than a 4% alcohol beer, I'll actually just say the 4% alcohol beer is what I'm going to have during weeknights if I must. And then on weekends is when I'll treat myself and do this other thing. So there's all kinds of ways to like make it not a huge giant overnight step, because that's what you really want to avoid. It doesn't have to be like a frequency thing. It could be a volume thing. I mean, who knows how to do it? But I think there's lots of ways. And if you think about it, you can come up with ways that are these nice little agreements with yourself that don't sound like deprivation, and don't require any kind of perfection, but they are effective in really changing your habit. On that note, like this is not exactly the same, but it's not so different. And to me, like if you want to make a big change, to me, there's a very scary thing about making permanent change. It's a scary, sometimes like if you talk about wanting to go vegan, for example, some people just don't want to, they may want that in the short term, but in the back of their mind thinking like, that's not really what I want forever. Like, I don't want to give up this and this and this, even though if I think I kind of should. And so I think in those cases, like a short-term challenge is really a really useful tool way to do those things. Because like if let's say you've been vegan for 3 days, and you start really craving a cheeseburger, like it doesn't help you to think I can't have this cheeseburger now because I'm vegan. And I also can't have it forever. I can't have it 30 years from now either because I'm vegan for now. I can never have that again. That's not very helpful at all. And so similar things go for other challenges, like the idea of going to the gym. I've been in moments before where I'm going to the gym, but as I'm doing it, I'm not loving it. And I'm starting to think, am I really going to be doing this like at the end of this year, still going to this, like still doing this? And it really can drain your willpower and motivation to be thinking that I have to keep doing this thing forever. So often in that kind of situation, I would ask yourself, why do I really want to do this? But second of all, like if you can, rather than do things forever, especially at the beginning of something new, like do it as a defined end date challenge. So like, I'm going to be vegan for this week. That can really help a lot, because then it's not, I can't have a cheeseburger right now and never again. It's, I can't have a cheeseburger now and I can find some way to make it 4 more days until I, can tell myself that I won, that I was successful in my challenge. I kept my promise to myself. And then I'm at this point 4 more days from now, hopefully when I'm not craving a cheeseburger anymore, because that has passed. And then you can make a better decision about, did that challenge actually serve me? Did I like how I felt, or are there some things that I want to do differently? And then you can say, now I'm going to go for a month or 10 days or something less, or I'm going to adapt it in this different way. Maybe to go back to the previous example of like making it a little easier, you could say, I'm going to be vegetarian or mostly vegetarian at home, or sorry, when I go out, but when I'm at home, that's when I'll be really strict and keep it easier, because it's often easier to eat that way at home. So that's just another way to kind of modify it to make it not impossible. Even if your goal is ultimately to get all the way there, spending a lot of time doing it in some sort of modified fashion, and then maybe eventually going for like a challenge to, do it all the way, but do it for a week, and then do it all the way, but do it for 10 days or a month. To me, that's actually exactly how I went vegan, by the way, which is why I'm using that example. But that's, to me, that's one of the most effective ways to achieve something that for a lot of people seems like a very hard goal to reach. And certainly if you just went overnight, there are not a lot of overnight vegans that stay vegan for very long in my experience. And I mean, I love that people want to do that, but it's just hard. It's hard to do it in that fashion.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. Well, we could go off on that vegan conversation, but to bring us back, you brought up a couple great tips and tricks. So just to reiterate, or to put a different spin on them. One is rewards. So the extrinsic, intrinsic, thinking about, if you're craving that cheeseburger, but don't give in to it immediately, sort of ride that wave of desire and say to yourself, like, I think the common example is like, if you go to the gym, you get to eat a piece of chocolate, right? Or you get to eat that donut or whatever it might be. And guess what? Like, in the scheme of things, if you can, go to the gym for 30 days in a row and you ate 30 donuts, I think on net, if you develop that habit and actually keep going to the gym and then wean yourself off of the donuts, You may be developing an addiction separate from your new habit. But the point is that I think there are those hacks, and obviously, start going to like, I'm going to have a donut every other day, have a donut on the weekend. Or to your point, leaning into that desire for, a 7% beer, but say like, that's my reward at the end of the week, and really like building in those rewards. I think, it's amazing what kind of additional willpower, and it is, right? We're trying to get past the point at which you have to use willpower, because it is a finite resource and you will, drain it, as you pointed out, as we think about this framework. But you can use rewards, you can hack your willpower in such a way that you can push through the short-term habit building process. And I think it's just worth, thinking about those rewards. The other piece was, I think the mindfulness part, right? Where I found, if I have that desire for something, and there are very few desires I don't give into, because I'm a pretty boring person. It's like caffeine and work are the two things that I most crave at this point in my life. But if I, did have that desire, I have always found that kind of leaning into it and say like, okay, great, I'm going to do that, but not tonight, tomorrow, right? And just like try to get one more day where you're building that willpower muscle. You're training yourself not to give in to those urges, because it is so easy, going back to alcohol, which is something you and I have always talked about. Just saying like, you know what? Yeah, tomorrow night I'm going to have a glass of wine and relax and not stress out about this. But tonight I'm going to go for a jog, right? And lo and behold, tomorrow, you may not want that wine, and you just keep adding to that chain, as we talked about. I think we have thrown a lot of ideas at our community in this conversation. I'm super curious just to hear your thoughts, because Tony Robbins has a quote that I'm going to get wrong, but something to the extent of like, people don't always get what they want, but they always like meet their standards.
Yeah,
right?
They get what they tolerate, right?
Something along those lines, exactly. So I do believe that there is something to identity and visualization. And if you say to yourself, like, I'm the kind of person who goes to the gym every day, right? And you buy the gym clothes, we've all done it. You buy the new running shoes because you're a runner now, right? You build that identity. Maybe you have a mantra every morning that you look at. You say, like, I'm the kind of person who does this or that. And I have found really that, building out that visualization, if you will, and kind of redefining who I am, right? Even looking at role models and saying like, no, I'm not going to do that, because this is who I am, right? As I build certain new habits. I'm curious how that fits into your framework, and if you've ever found that to be helpful.
Yeah, so this is extremely important, and just in case people are thinking, okay, this has gone too far. Now it's a personal development thing, or a woo-woo kind of like let visualize and law of attraction deal. There's actually some science behind this, and it's really interesting. So I don't know if I mentioned it. I mentioned it in our podcast an hour ago. Charles Duhigg has a book called The Power of Habit. And in that book, the first 3/4 of it, he talks all about, the habit loop, the cue, the action, the reward, and so much more that is, very sciencey thing about how the way habits are formed and how we can kind of hack that or manipulate that to increase our chances of success. But at the end of the book, he says there's this one factor that's more important, essentially, I don't know, not in these exact words, but it's basically, this is more important than any of this other stuff. Like, this is the thing that you need for everything else to work. And it turns out what it is belief in yourself. And he didn't make this up. There was some study, I forget exactly what the context was, but it was a scientific study. And I think there have been multiple since then that showed that the people who believed that they were going to successfully change, that was the ones who did. And the people who didn't have that belief, their amount of success, or percentage of success went way down. And so then the question is, okay, that's great. How can I create that belief in myself? I think the belief in yourself, like that's subject to whatever method, you kind of think works for you or find works for you. But what you're mentioning, visualization, hanging out with people who have the identity kind of that you want to have, those are ways that you slowly but surely change the way you think of yourself. And even stuff like you mentioned this idea about like, testing yourself when you want to quit your thing. A great example is like if you're trying to learn to meditate, for example, and you want to do it, and you start with, if you're listening to me, you start with 2 minutes at a time or 30 seconds at a time instead of trying to go for 10 or 15 minutes because that's painful at first. But you go for 2 or 3 minutes, and then like you'll get to a point where you kind of want to get up and you want to stop. And if you can just push yourself through like 1 or 2 of those want to get ups, then you're doing something. You're training this little muscle. And on the other hand, every time you keep a habit, like you're kind of reinforcing to yourself that when you make a promise to yourself, you keep it. And that's another reason to make those promises really, really small in the beginning, like the running thing, like make it get out the door and run for 2 minutes or run down the block or whatever. Because every time you do that, you've successfully told yourself that when I say I'm going to do something, I do it. Which unfortunately for so many of us, with all the New Year stats you mentioned, that's not the message most of us have. We think we're not good at things. We think we fail. We're not good at change. Not just as a species, but individually, we think I'm not good at making changes. And that's really unfortunate. So you got to find a way to change that so that you truly can believe, because this isn't just made up woo-woo stuff. This is like the science actually says, if you believe that you're going to be successful in a habit change, you're much more likely to actually be successful.
I think that's a great place to end. What's the saying? If you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right.
You're right. Yep.
Yeah. So, but again, I think the broader parts of our conversation, building on top of the framework that you introduced, all these different things in terms of bringing visual cues into your environment or leveraging technology, building chains and all of it, rewards, short-term, extrinsic ones, a piece of chocolate, all of it can contribute to, overcoming that willpower deficit that we all face. And I think if you introduce a little bit of mindfulness in that process, where you're also building a new identity and you're thinking about that and you're making it really intentional, all of a sudden, by the end of that 3 weeks, if you use these hacks, you might actually believe that this is going to stick. I'm changing. I'm different. And this is just part of my identity now. And as we have both experienced, you just got to get through the habit formation piece, because once it's a habit, it's super easy. And so I hope for the community listening right now, some of these tips and tricks will help you in January or anytime this year as you're developing new habits. We'd love to hear from you in our new Facebook community. Of course, you can respond to any of these emails that we've sent out or on social media. We love hearing from you. So please do connect. Let us know what you are working on. And Matt, thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your habit change expertise.
Thank you for the conversation, Matt. That was fun. Thanks for listening, everyone.